Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I go by Hiram or Bogwa. Hey guys, welcome back. So this is the final video in the Java Fundamental series. I've created a program that allows a user to add different types of users to the system for record keeping, and it prints out the users available in the system when the user exits. Now, the purpose of this video is to go over the different concepts that I've covered, or highlight the major concepts that I've covered in the Java Fundamental series. So if you haven't watched any of the videos in the series, I would encourage you to start from the beginning and watch them all and work your way into this. And these are things you should master and know how they work. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I've done is I've created my Java project, and as I said with IntelliJ, you just go to File, New, Project, right? And then after that, just go next, put the project name, and finish. But in this instance, I've already created that. So in this project, I've created my package. Now, remember what I told you about the packages. The naming convention is your domain reversed. So for example, my domain will be coderush.com. So in this instance, I reverse it. It's com.coderush, and then under that project, I have all my different packages that I have in there. And as you can see here, I have my dataset package and I have my services package. And then I have my main class. So I'll go ahead and minimize this code. So the important thing to remember about the main class, this is where all Java programs begin their executions from. And the important thing to remember about the main class is it's of type static. And whenever we have a static method, we mean we're binding that method to the class. So we don't need to create a new instance of the class, similar to how I do here with a student service, teacher service, and admin service. So I can just call apprunner.main without having to instantiate the class itself. So with that, let's look at the dataset package and the classes that are in there. So in here, I have my user class, and here I've defined a few fields: name, username, email, and role. And the important thing to note is I've made them private. I've made my role public, but let me actually make that private. And this is what we call encapsulation. I'm hiding the data fields and only exposing them through the getter setter method. So remember, your data fields, you should always set them as private and expose them through the getter setter methods. And then in here I have what we call our constructor. And if you can remember, Java gives us a default constructor which has empty arguments, but as soon as we define a constructor in here, the default constructor disappears and we are forced to use this. So anyone trying to use this class, they must instantiate it using this constructor, which forces them to enter all fields. And then here I set them using this keyword. Now when it comes to this keyword, this references the fields that we have in our class, right? So if I was to remove this, I'm setting the field to itself, so we don't want to do that. So I'll go ahead and undo that. And then next, let's look at the role. So here we have what we call enum. So we typically use enums to represent constants, and it's typically constants that are of the same type. So for example, here I have role, right? And then I have the different roles defined in here. And as you can see, this is how you define the enum, public enum, and then you give the name. And there you go. And pretty much I just need to define them here. And the standard is to define your enums in all caps. Now, let's say if this is admin row, if that was the constant, we would do admin underscore row. But in this instance, it's just admin. So we're just going to leave it as that. So the way this program will work is I have my do while loop that's going to constantly ask the user if they want to add a user to the system. Now there are three types of users that they can add. They can add a student, they can add a teacher, and they can also add an admin, or they can just enter E to exit. But the user will be stuck in this loop until they enter E to exit the loop. And in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call on the teacher service where I'm going to add that user. And then I'm calling this get user details method, and I'm passing the role. First, let's look at the services themselves: the student service, teacher service, and admin service. So here I've defined this user service interface, So now, as you can remember, an interface is just an abstract class. So the methods in here do not have any body defined. And that's the main difference between an interface and if this was, let's say, an abstract class, is the interface, all the methods in here cannot contain a body, right? And then with the interface, we implement the interface. So if we go to my admin service, as we can see, I'm implementing that user service, and that's forcing my admin service to implement those methods. So I have to define those methods in here. Same thing for my student service and teacher service. Now, I haven't filled out that data in here, but we're not using those. Next here, the teacher service, student service, and admin service, I'm extending this common service. So if we look at the common service, the first thing that you note here is I don't define public or private or anything like that whenever it comes to defining this common service. And if you can remember right, whenever I don't define the accessor, then this by default is package private. So if we were to come to App Runner and I try to define the common service, I will not be able to. As you can see, it's not showing up. And that's because it's private to this package. So this class can only be utilized in this package. I can't access it outside of this package. But in here in the common service, I've defined a type, I've defined a variable users, which is a list, and I've added a method to add the users, set the users, and also, get the list of users. So now if we go to the lower services, in here I haven't defined a constructor, right? But if I was to define a constructor, for example, in the student service, the one thing to note is here you're required to call the super, right? And what this is doing is it's calling the constructor of the common service. So this has a default, it has the Java default constructor. But, if I don't include that, that will be called automatically. With that, let's go ahead and look at the App Runner class again. So here I've instantiated those 3 services, and as you can remember, this is what we call a class. This is the definition of the class. But once we instantiate that class, what we have now here is we have the object. So whenever we instantiate, we're creating an instance of this service in the memory. So there's actual memory that has been allocated now for this service. So if we look here in my do while loop, I'm going to read that user's input, and then based on the choice that they enter, I'm going to execute the specific logic. So if it's teacher, I'm going to add teacher details. If it's students, I'm going to do the same, and same thing for the admin service. The important thing to note here is I'm doing this .trim, and then I'm converting it to uppercase. These are methods that are provided to you by the string class. Again, we use string class, and this is a Java provided class, and it provides you with many methods that allow you to work with strings. So here I trim out the white space, and then I call the to uppercase, so I'm converting. So even if the user enters lowercase s or t or a or e, it's going to convert it to uppercase, so that doesn't matter for us. So in here I have I'm calling teacher service .add users .add user, and that's inside the common service. And as you can see, that takes in a user, and then it checks if this list is null. I'm going to instantiate that list, right? And then I'm going to add that user to there. Another thing to remember is, like, we covered list, and list, you can think of them as arrays, but it's just a different class that we use to store a list of items. So here we ask the user for their name, username, email, and then we return a new user. Now remember what I told you, whenever we're defining a new user, we have to utilize that constructor. So here I have to pass the username, name, email, and the role. So the thing here is, whenever I call this method, I'm passing the role. So the method is the same, and this is one way you can reuse your code. So after the user has added different users to the system and they're satisfied, they can exit the loop, right? So this loop says do this while the user's choice does not equal E. So once we've exited the do while loop, we're going to print out the admin, teacher, and student details. So I'm calling that service. Actually, here I'm printing from the same service, so let me fix that. All three services have this get users, and as you can see, that's shared inside the common service. I'm going to call the get users method and retrieve that data. And then if we look at the print method, here the print method, we use what is known as the for loop, and what we're saying is for our index, which equals 0, as long as our index is less than that list size, right? And remember, whenever we're iterating through a list, or whenever we're accessing an item in a list, even in an array in Java, and this is true even in other programming languages, we start our count from 0. We don't start from 1. So that's why here we're starting from 0 and we're going all the way to less than the size, right? Because for example, if the users list has 10 items, we need to count from 0 to 9. We actually don't want to go to 10. If we go to 10, we're going to get an exception, right? So here I print out my user details and I iterate through that for loop until we hit our I hits the point where it's equal to the size. And remember, here we have the I++. Now another way that we could have printed this would have been using the Lambda method for each. So that would look something like this. And then in here I can pretty much do the same thing, or do it a little bit different. Let me show you. So instead of users.get, I'll just replace this with user. Now, as you can see, this for each is much simpler compared to the for loop statement, but it all comes from the same concept of the for loop, right? So that's why it's important to understand the for loop, and then you can use whatever flavor you want. There's also the for. So with the list, we're also able to iterate like this for users, right? We can iterate like that also, but it's the same concept as the for loop. So that's why I encourage you to learn the for loop first, and then you can use the different types of loop statements that you would like. But for loop is at the fundamental of what you should know. So with that, I'll go ahead and run this and we can test it out. So let me expand it. Again, add users in the system. I'm going to start with student. S. Now note, I added a lowercase s. Then I'm going to add an admin. And then I'm going to add, let's see, teacher. And let's add one more student. And now with that, I'll go ahead and exit. So once I exit, we should see the list of data, the list of users that we have in the system printed out. So E. And there you go. As you can see, admin users in the system. Printed out admin users, teacher users in the system. Printed out our teacher, and the same thing for student. Now in this instance, we had 2 students, so here printed out the student details. Thank you for watching my tutorials. Give it a thumbs up if you like it, and subscribe if you haven't, and also check me out on Instagram at coderush.io.